Hey, how's it going everybody? It's Sketch and welcome back to the channel. And on today's episode we're looking at Run Saber, a side-scrolling hack and slash game developed by HoriSoft and published by Atlus for the Super Nintendo in 1993. This is a game that is often compared to Strider since its combat and platforming have a few similar elements. To be fair, it almost runs tit for tat with a good amount of the original Strider, though it has a lot of traits that are unique to it as well. Before we get much further, let's check out the story. In the year 2998, Earth's atmosphere has become polluted to the point of collapse, and the only hope to possibly restore it is his scientist Gordon Bruford and his program known as the Renaissance Project. Only downside is it will emit weapons grade amounts of radioactivity around the globe, so mankind's gonna need to hold up on another planet in the meantime. The Doctor stays behind on the planet and exposes himself to the radiation, causing him to mutate into an evil general of a sizable army of mutant clones and parasites with ambitions of taking control over humanity. Once word gets out, Project Run Saber is enacted, creating cyborg warriors who wield the elemental swords of ice and thunder and vaporize nearly any material. Alan and Sheena return to Earth to stop Dr. Bruford and the reprogrammed Saber Kurtz, along with an army of mutants and mad scientists. Gameplay wise, you've got a side-scrolling action platformer that's going to feel familiar if you've played Strider 1 since the mechanics are almost the same. You can slash through waves of enemies with your saber, which depending on what character you pick can either have a more vertical or horizontal trajectory, which can be upgraded to extend its reach. There's also screen clearing attacks which you can stock up on, which put down heavy damage on bosses and wipe ads off screen. Through the game's 5 stages, you'll fight a mid-boss and then a main boss at the end of each level. Controls feel pretty tight here with a few additions like being able to use barrier jumps by holding up on the control pad and then a lethal dive kick by holding down on the D-pad. Similar to Strider, you can cling to walls and ceilings as well as slide under obstructions and through enemies, since also the slide dishes damage if foes are close enough. Run Saber has a bit of a learning curve until you get more comfortable with it, but you can also farm a lot of extra lives and upgrades through each stage. You start out with 2 lives and 3 continues by default, and you can add more in the options menu. What's nice here is that you respawn and continue right where you leave off, but as soon as you wipe all your continues, it's a wrap. You gotta start over from the beginning. Run Saber also has an arrow on the HUD to guide you to the next area of the stage, which could be helpful on the first or second run. To be honest, getting lost is kind of difficult here. Bosses here are also pretty sick and have some pretty recognizable attack patterns initially, but as it gets further in, bosses will smoke you like a pack of cools until you figure out their attacks and their ranges. There's also some huge boss fights and some very neat effects work here. Graphics wise, you do see some really colorful and detailed enemies and environments. There's some pretty slick animation here too, like when taking a hit, your character does like an almost WWF style corkscrew spin, which is entertaining to watch. The graphics are definitely one of Run Saber's strongest attributes. Mode 7 is also utilized quite a bit here too with the intros to each stage, like the overworld map, and even has it worked into several of the encounters, like on stage 1 with the boss fight on the Harrier jet, which is honestly pretty sick. You'll see a lot of scaling of enemies due to Mode 7, especially with the death animations when you clear a boss fight, and you also get to see the triumphant saber spin. Environments themselves will drum up comparisons to Strider since there are a few similar locales and obstacles. However, there is a fair bit that is unique to Run Saber also. The mechanical spider encounter has you scaling a building, which is also pretty tight and also visually pretty interesting. Backgrounds also have a lot of detail, and you'll also see a lot of parallax scrolling here, and everything runs really smoothly, which is another thing I'll say that Run Saber has over Strider 1. By comparison, Run Saber does a fair bit better and has a lot less load time, and is also a more streamlined experience since there's not much in the way of slowdown either. Boss designs here overall are also pretty interesting, like the giant corpse on the train encounter and the final encounter with the big Bruford himself, which takes up majority of the screen, which is pretty gnarly. While there aren't as many cutscenes as Strider, the few that are here all look pretty good, but they don't have any text really telling the player what's happening. These scenes mainly appear in the beginning of the game and at the end, so it's somewhat implied that the beginning depicts the conflict and at the end the resolution. Sound wise, it's pretty solid here with some really good tunes in the backgrounds as well as some good sound effects work. There's some pretty hype tunes in Run Saber, and it's got a good bit of variety with more driving tracks that have an early Konami type feel, along with tracks that are more laid back and chilled with certain sections which work out well enough through the game's 5 stages. There's even some speech synth here in a couple of the tunes and when you defeat a mid and main boss. As far as the sound effects here, it's for the most part pretty good. Like when you slash or use your special attack, there's some low-key voice sampling also, and the impacts are kind of all over the shop, but the sound is decent overall, and also explosions are pretty good and they sound pretty crunchy here as well. Overall, Run Saber is an awesome game that, while maybe not as well known as Strider, is a lot of fun to play, especially considering it's a whole lot easier as well. It's got good pacing even though it is pretty short, only having 5 stages in all. For all the similarities it has to Strider, it's got several things that set it apart where it does its own thing and it has some really dope moments in its gameplay and presentation. The only real downside here is the length of playtime, considering it is very short and takes about maybe maybe 30 minutes to clear. Run Saber gets an 8 out of 10 and comes recommended to action platformer fans and hack and slash game fans, since this is pretty much straight up action from start to finish. This one has gone up in price a bit over the last few years for a physical copy, so play this one however you can. I'll always like the Strider games a little bit more, but Run Saber is still a very solid game. If you can find a copy for a good price, go for it. And also there's a co-op modes for 2 players which allow you to straight up steamroll the game once you learn the ropes, and also it's a lot more fun to bring a friend. And if you made it this far into the video, thank you again for checking this out. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you can use it as a resource. Check back often. We'll have more reviews and commentaries coming up in the near future. But until then, stay safe out there, take it easy. I'll see you on the next one.